If I asked you to picture an online predator right now, I mean, I'd bet a very specific image immediately jumps to
Oh,
mind.
absolutely.
Right. You're probably picturing like a loner, an isolated anti-psycho guy sitting in a dark basement somewhere, just completely disconnected from society.
That is the classic stereotype, yeah.
But what if I told you that the actual data, like the hard empirical statistics, says that the undetected offender is vastly more likely to be the married, highly educated guy with a great income, the guy who, volunteers to coach your kid's soccer team.
It's chilling. I mean, it completely upends our entire cultural narrative about who is actually committing these crimes.
It really does.
And that cognitive dissonance, that massive gap between the creepy stranger we imagine and the respected community member, the data actually reveals. That's exactly why our traditional systems for catching them have been failing for decades.
Well, today we are tearing down that camouflage. I want to welcome you, the inherently curious learner who is, always looking for those connections between seeming totally disparate fields to this custom-tailored deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. And look, we are tackling a subject today that is, without a doubt, one of the darkest realities of the modern digital age. We're talking about the online exploitation of children.
It's a heavy topic.
It is, but I want to make our mission for today's conversation absolutely clear right off the bat. We are looking at this entirely through the lens of a highly advanced, deeply hopeful technological solution.
Right. The focus here is on the fix, not just the problem.
Exactly. We are going to explore how we can re-engineer the exact same predictive artificial intelligence that, say, is used to optimize Swiss train schedules, to actually intercept and prevent pedocrime.
And to do that, we are synthesizing two massive, incredibly dense stacks of new research.
Very different stacks, I might add.
Yes. On one side, we have a comprehensive 2026 French government blue booklet. It's called the Livret Systems Predictifs.
I've been poring over this French livret, by the way, and it is, it's data science at its absolute most refined.
It really is. It's a rigorous mathematical blueprint detailing the mechanics, the deployment, and the strict ethical boundaries of advanced predictive AI.
Right. It's essentially the playbook for forecasting weather patterns and mapping out burglary heat zones.
Exactly. And then on the other side of the table, we are smashing that AI blueprint into a groundbreaking series of multi-country academic studies, also from 2026.
And those span across, Australia, the UK, and the US?
Yep, all three. And this research provides a massive, super granular data set detailing the specific psychological profiles, the digital footprints, and the internet habits of these undetected offenders.
The people engaging in what the literature calls TFCSEA. Right. Technology-facilitated child sexual exploitation and abuse.
That's the one. And synthesizing these two domains gives us a real roadmap.
A proactive roadmap, essentially.
Precisely. By feeding this brand new behavioral data into these advanced predictive models, law enforcement and public health officials can fundamentally change their entire approach.
They can finally stop just reacting.
Yes. We can transition from a system that reacts to tragedies long after the damage is done to a proactive shield that predicts and intercepts the behavior before a child is ever even harmed.
Okay, let's start by looking at the sheer scale of the crisis, because the numbers in the 2026 data are just genuinely staggering. When I first read the summary, I actually had to double-check the citations.
I don't blame you. The numbers are horrifying.
The research indicates that globally, 300 million children experience some form of technology-facilitated sexual exploitation and abuse every single year.
300 million. I mean, just to put that in perspective for you, that is roughly equivalent to the entire population of the United States.
Wow, that's a staggering visualization.
It is a global pandemic of digital violence. And the tragedy of our current system, all of it, law enforcement, child protection services, the courts, is that it is structurally designed to be completely reactive.
Right, they have to wait for something terrible to happen first.
Exactly. The authorities just sit and wait for a crime to occur. They wait for an illicit image to be flagged by some server somewhere, or for a piece of content to be intercepted, or, and this is the most tragic part, they wait for a victim to eventually come forward.
The system literally requires a victim to be created before it even turns the engine on.
That is the grim reality of reactive policing.
Mm-hmm.
But to build a proactive, predictive system, well, we face a pretty fundamental diagnostic challenge right out of the gate.
Which is what?
You cannot program an artificial intelligence to find a specific pattern if you don't even know what the pattern looks like in the first place.
Right. The algorithm needs coordinates. It needs to know what it's hunting for.
And this is precisely where the 2026 multi-country study changes the entire landscape. See, previous studies often relied on just interviewing convicted offenders who are already sitting in prison.
Which makes sense on the surface.
Right.
Go talk to the guys who did it.
It does, but as any statistician will point out, prison populations suffer from a massive selection bias. You aren't actually studying all offenders.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you are only studying the ones who are reckless or careless enough to get caught.
That is such a brilliant point. The guys in prison are essentially the bad criminals. Like, they failed at hiding.
Exactly.
If we only profile them, we are building a profile of incompetence, not a profile of the actual threat landscape out there in the real world.
You've hit the nail on the head. So to circumvent that bias, these researchers did something completely different. They surveyed 4,918 men across the US, the UK, and Australia.
And they just found these guys in the general public.
Yeah, they used quota-based sampling to ensure this group perfectly reflected the actual demographic makeup of those countries based on national census data.
That's incredible.
It was a true deep dive into the general population to find the undetected offenders, the ones who are actively offending online but have never, ever been flagged by the authorities.
And the resulting profile from that general population survey is where that basement-dwelling loner stereotype completely shatters.
It shatters into a million pieces.
Let's really look at what this cloak of respectability entails, because honestly, it's terrifyingly effective camouflage. According to the data, compared to non-offending men, the undetected offenders actively exploiting children online are significantly more likely to hold university degrees.
Right, they're highly educated.
They report higher median household incomes. They are statistically more likely to be in a stable relationship or even legally married. They are more likely to have children of their own living in their household. And in a detail that I think is going to make anyone listening right now pause, they are significantly more likely to actively work with children in their day-to-day offline lives.
I know. They are the teachers, the pediatricians, the sports coaches, the youth group leaders.
It's the ultimate cover.
It really is. And because they possess all of these pro-social protective factors, steady employment, a family, and apparent ability to self-regulate perfectly in public, they simply do not raise any red flags in the physical communities.
Right, because they don't fit the psychological profile of a violent, erratic criminal, so nobody treats them like one.
Which leads to what the researchers term the long detection lag. The camouflage of their respectability allows them to offend online for prolonged periods, sometimes stretching into decades, without ever experiencing a single intervention.
Decades, that's insane.
Yeah. If human detectives are just waiting for these specific individuals to act suspiciously at the grocery store or the local park, they will literally be waiting indefinitely.
So if I'm playing devil's advocate here for a second, this data actually seems to present a massive problem for us.
How so?
Well, if we are trying to build an AI to catch these guys, but the data proves that they look perfectly normal on paper, like they have good jobs, they pay their taxes, they don't have criminal records, how can any predictive system possibly find them?
It sounds impossible, right?
It sounds like trying to find a specific, perfectly clear drop of water in an ocean of other perfectly clear drops.
Mhm.
If their camouflage is that flawless, aren't we just asking an algorithm to guess blindly?
That is the exact paradox that has stumped criminologists for years. And if we were only evaluating their physical offline existence, your water drop analogy is perfectly accurate. The camouflage holds.
Okay, so what's the pivot?
The critical pivot here is that we are not looking at their offline lives. We are shifting the battlefield completely to the internet. And while their offline lives are seamlessly integrated into society, their online behaviors leave highly specific, deeply measurable digital footprints.
I see. So we aren't looking at the fact that he's a soccer coach.
No, not at all.
We're looking at the fact that he's running a highly specific sequence of encrypted network requests at, say, 3 a.m. on a Tuesday.
Exactly. The internet is fundamentally an architecture of memory. Every single encrypted handshake, every data packet size, every app installation, it's a measurable data point.
It leaves a trace.
It does. And while human detectives lack the sheer processing power to sift through billions of digital interactions just to find one anomalous pattern, this is the exact environment where predictive AI thrives.
Which brings us directly to that French livrette. Let's look at how we take these digital footprints and actually feed them into a predictive system. Because the Leverett system's predictives isn't just some abstract theory.
Oh, not at all. It's a masterclass in operationalizing data.
It really is. So let's
Okay.
break it down.
Well, the Liverit explains that at its core, a predictive system, whether it relies on traditional time series forecasting like ARIMA or highly complex machine learning algorithms like XGBoost, it operates on one fundamental principle.
Yeah, what's that?
It looks at historical regularities to calculate the mathematical probability of future events.
Okay, let's make sure we ground those technical terms for a second. When you mention ARIMA, which stands for Autoregressive Integrated Moving Average.
That's a mouthful.
It is. Or XGBoost, which is extreme gradient boosting.
Yeah.
We are basically talking about different flavors of prediction engines, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Like, ARIMA looks at how things change over time, while XGBoost builds these massive branching decision trees to find hidden patterns in super messy data.
That is a perfect synthesis of it. And the French Livrette illustrates this beautifully by looking at how the gendarmerie, the French national police force, currently uses these systems in the physical world to map heat zones for burglaries.
So they are literally predicting where a break-in will happen before a window is even smashed. How does that physically work?
Well, the system ingests vast amounts of historical data. We're talking the exact GPS coordinates of past burglaries, the time of day, the layout of the neighborhood, the weather, the day of the week, all of it.
So it's looking at everything.
Everything. And the algorithm, often utilizing an XGBoost model, identifies complex interactions between all these variables. It might discover a totally hidden regularity.
Like what?
Like if a house with a specific architectural layout on a corner lot is robbed on a Tuesday evening during a rainstorm, the probability of a neighboring house being targeted within 48 hours skyrockets to, say, 85%.
Oh, wow. So it sees patterns a human detective would just miss.
Exactly. The algorithm processes all this and outputs a map for the police commander, overlaid with glowing red heat zones.
And then the police dynamically deploy their patrol cars to those specific red zones, right? Creating a deterrent presence that prevents the second burglary from ever even taking place.
That's the goal. It's incredibly elegant.
It is. But a physical neighborhood has streets and alleys and houses. How do we translate a physical burglar heat zone to the vast, borderless infrastructure of the internet? Like, where is Elm Street on the web?
This is the genius of combining the French AI blueprint with that 2026 academic data. The researchers didn't just ask these men about their demographics, they meticulously documented exactly how they navigate the internet.
They mapped their digital habits.
Yes! The academic data provides the exact coordinates for our online heat zone. They discovered statistically significant regularities, specific digital habits that wildly over-index in the offender population compared to non-offending men with similar internet usage profiles.
Okay, so let's look at the actual coordinates, because what blew my mind when I was reading the research was the first major flag they found: heavy privacy tech.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
The undetected offenders are utilizing a massive, disproportionate stack of encrypted applications and anonymity tools.
It is a profound statistical deviation. The data showed enormous over-indexing in the use of end-to-end encrypted messaging apps. Things like Telegram, Signal, Element, WhatsApp, and Hive.
It's like they're building a fortress.
Pretty much. It also highlighted heavy, sustained use of the Tor network, the decentralized routing system used to access the dark web, as well as commercial VPNs or virtual private networks.
And what's fascinating to me is that the data isn't just a monolith, right? There are deep regional nuances that an AI would need to learn to be accurate.
Oh, absolutely.
For instance, I read that the U.S. offenders were over 3 times more likely to use the Tor browser than non-offenders.
Huh.
But if you look at Australia and the U.S., they heavily favored WhatsApp and Element.
And the UK was different again.
Right. In the UK and the U.S., offenders showed a massive preference for Signal, being up to 4.2 times more likely to use it.
And that geographic context is absolutely crucial for tuning those XGBoost decision trees. An anomaly in London might look mathematically different than an anomaly in Sydney.
But, if you're listening right now, you might be raising a very technical objection.
Let's hear it.
If an app like Signal is end-to-end encrypted, meaning nobody, not even the company that built the app, can read the content of the messages, how does an AI know they're doing something illicit? If the payload is completely locked, how does the AI actually see the crime?
That is the critical distinction between content and metadata. The AI does not need to break the encryption to see the pattern.
It doesn't need to read the text.
Exactly. We can think of metadata as the envelope, while the encrypted message is the letter inside. The AI can't read the letter, but it can weigh the envelope. It can see the postmark. It can see exactly how many envelopes are being sent, at what exact millisecond, and to which routing servers.
I love that. I always thought of metadata like radioactive dye injected into a bloodstream. You can't actually see the blood moving beneath the skin, but you can track the glowing dye as it pools in specific areas, telling you exactly where the system is working or failing.
That is a brilliant analogy. Yeah, if a user connects to a VPN, the AI notes the connection. If they then immediately initiate a Tor connection, the AI measures the specific packet sizes of the data moving back and forth.
The size of the envelopes.
Right. Certain types of illicit forums or peer-to-peer image sharing networks have highly distinct metadata signatures. They have bursts of data that look mathematically completely different from someone just, streaming a movie or reading a news article on a VPN. The AI is analyzing the rhythm and the volume of the encrypted traffic, not the actual content.
Okay, so that metadata analysis of heavy encryption is coordinate number one. What was the second major coordinate the researchers found?
Financial anomalies. The 2026 study identified a highly significant likelihood that these undetected offenders own and actively use cryptocurrency for their online transactions.
Which again makes total logical sense if you think about it.
Why do you say that?
Well, if you are attempting to purchase illicit material or pay for access to a dark web form, you absolutely cannot use a Visa or MasterCard.
I'm definitely not.
The traditional banking system has incredibly strict anti-money laundering and know your customer KYC reporting protocols. Using a standard credit card leaves a permanent, glaring paper trail straight to your front door.
Precisely. The reliance on decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges is a premeditated effort to bypass that financial surveillance. It is a necessary mechanical step in their process. They have to do it to operate.
And the third coordinate involves what the researchers called concurrent digital habits.
Yeah, this one is super interesting.
These are behaviors that seem completely unrelated to exploitation, but statistically, they cluster around the offender profile. The data shows high frequencies of using dating and romance websites.
Yep.
They frequently engage in live streaming themselves. And they consume very specific categories of extreme adult pornography, specifically violent content and bestiality.
And these concurrent habits act as the final variables in our equation. Now, a defense attorney or a privacy advocate would rightly point out that, taken in isolation, absolutely none of these behaviors are illegal.
Right. I mean, using a VPN is just good personal cybersecurity. Millions of people use encrypted apps for work every day.
Sure.
Trading cryptocurrency is mainstream finance now. Swiping on a dating app is perfectly normal. Even consuming legally produced, extreme adult pornography is protected expression in many jurisdictions.
Exactly.
If you look at any of these data points individually, you have zero evidence of a crime.
Which is exactly why human analysis often fails here. A human detective looking at a spreadsheet might just see a guy who really values his privacy and likes trading crypto on the side.
They just see a tech-savvy guy.
Right. But a predictive algorithm, even looking at isolated stars, it is looking for a constellation.
Ah, it's the XGBoost model in action.
Exactly. The algorithm is specifically designed to evaluate the interactions between all these variables simultaneously.
How does it phrase that question mathematically speaking?
It asks, if we observe a user routing their traffic through a VPN while simultaneously utilizing the Tor network, while pinging a cryptocurrency wallet for an outbound transaction, while actively connecting to dating applications and accessing specific nodes associated with extreme adult content, what is the statistical probability of outcome A?
Wow.
And the 2026 data proves conclusively that this specific combination of perfectly legal behaviors forms a massive, glaring, statistical red flag.
It's the digital equivalent of drawing a glowing red circle around a specific house on a burglary heat map.
That's exactly what it is.
So the AI creates the heat map. It flags a specific IP address or an anonymized user profile. Let's talk about the operational reality of that, because this is where the theoretical meets the actual legal system.
And it's a tricky intersection.
It really is. We cannot live in a society where a computer algorithm automatically issues an arrest warrant just because someone's VPN and crypto usage looks suspicious to a machine. That is literal Minority Report thought police territory.
I agree completely, and the French livret is unequivocally clear on this boundary. The predictive AI does not make decisions. It provides decision support. Its sole function is triage.
Walk us through what that triage actually looks like for a cyber detective sitting at a desk.
Imagine a law enforcement cyber unit with severely limited resources, which is usually the case. They cannot monitor the entire internet. It's too big. The AI heat map provides them with a prioritized list of high-probability targets.
So it narrows the field.
Exactly. Instead of waiting years for that long detection lag to finally crack, the AI says, hey, focus your human resources on this specific IP address today. This is where the smoke is.
It effectively removes the camouflage.
It does. And from there, human detectives take over entirely. They might deploy an undercover digital asset, an officer posing on a forum or a platform to see if the flagged user attempts to initiate contact or groom them.
They do actual police work.
Exactly. Or if the probability score is high enough and it corroborates other intelligence they have, they might use that AI flag as part of the justification to request a highly targeted subpoena from a judge.
To compel the internet service provider to hand over specific unencrypted server logs.
Right. The AI just points the flashlight. The human beings have to go gather the actual evidence.
But, if we step back for a moment, catching these guys online, tracking them down after they've purchased the material or initiated a conversation with a child, that's incredible investigative work, sure.
What?
But the harm has already occurred. A child has already been victimized to create that material. If we truly want to adopt the public health approach that the researchers are advocating for, we have to move even further upstream, don't we?
We absolutely do.
How can public health authorities use this exact same predictive AI, not just to catch criminals, but to intervene before the crime is ever even committed?
That requires shifting our focus from the mechanics of the internet to the psychology of the user. And this brings us to what we can call the mind of the algorithm. Because advanced predictive systems are not just limited to tracking VPNs and crypto, they can actually model sociological and psychological risk factors too.
They can predict human fragility.
Yes, they can predict vulnerabilities.
Predicting psychology sounds incredibly abstract, though. How does the data actually ground that in reality?
It grounds it in developmental pathways. The 2026 academic studies extensively examined a metric known as ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences.
I've heard of ACEs in relation to, heart disease and addiction.
Exactly. It's a well-known public health metric. These are profound, potentially traumatic events that occur in a person's life before the age of 18. We are talking about physical or emotional abuse, severe neglect, or profound household dysfunction, like growing up with domestic violence or severe substance abuse.
So the researchers basically cross-reference childhood trauma with adult digital behavior.
Yes, and the statistical link they found is incredibly robust. The data shows a direct correlation between men who experienced high levels of ACEs and future engagement in technology-facilitated offending.
I think we have to be really careful here, though, because millions of people experience horrific childhood trauma, and the vast overwhelming majority of them never go on to harm anyone, let alone exploit children.
That is a crucial point to make.
Early childhood trauma might be a baseline vulnerability, like a crack in the foundation. But there has to be a catalyst, right? There has to be a specific psychological tipping point that turns trauma into predatory behavior.
You are exactly right, and identifying that specific catalyst is perhaps the most profound contribution of these academic studies. The researchers utilized an established psychological metric called the Child Sexual Abuse Myth Scale to decode the specific cognitive distortions that these men harbor.
Cognitive distortions, let's define that for the listener. We're essentially talking about the lies the brain tells itself to justify committing an atrocity.
That's exactly what they are.
They're intense defense mechanisms designed to neutralize feelings of guilt, shame, and moral revulsion.
They are the mental gymnastics required to actually commit the crime. And the study identified 3 primary clusters of these cognitive distortions. The first, and arguably the most chilling, is termed denial of abusiveness.
What does that look like in practice, in their heads?
It is the deeply entrenched belief that the child is actually a willing, consensual partner in the interaction.
Ugh, that's horrifying.
It is. Or, in the context of online exploitation, it's the belief that because the interaction happens through a digital screen, it isn't real harm. They convince themselves that merely viewing a photograph doesn't actually hurt the child depicted, completely detaching themselves from the reality that horrific physical abuse was required to produce that image in the first place.
It's just a complete fracture from reality. What's the second cluster?
The second is normalization or blame diffusion. This is the psychological maneuver of deflecting moral responsibility.
Passing the buck.
Exactly. It's the belief that the behavior is simply an acceptable part of the internet culture, or that it is actually someone else's fault entirely.
How do they justify that?
Well, for example, the offender might blame the parents for buying the child a smartphone with an unfiltered internet connection, or they blame a social media platform for allowing minors to create accounts. They literally tell themselves, I'm just taking advantage of a system that everyone else is using, and they made it too easy.
Wow. So the fault lies with Apple or the parents or the app, never the person actually typing the message.
Mhm.
And the third, distortion.
Restrictive stereotypes. This is a particularly insidious rationalization where the offender genuinely believes that their online behavior is actually preventing worse outcomes.
Wait, what? Preventing worse outcomes?
Yeah. They might tell themselves, if I just look at this illicit material online or chat in these dark web forums, it satiates my urges and prevents me from actually hurting a child in the physical world.
That is wild. They frame their active participation in a global abuse ecosystem as some bizarre form of harm reduction.
Yeah.
They view themselves as, like, holding back.
It is a profound level of self-deception. Now, here is where the predictive AI comes back into the picture in a big way.
Okay, how does the machine track thoughts?
The data revealed a deeply significant, measurable psychological shift. The algorithm isn't just looking for static beliefs, it's looking for velocity. The researchers found that when an individual's mindset shifts from normalization, thinking the behavior is just part of the internet landscape, to outright denial of abusiveness, believing that the abuse isn't actually harmful at all, their statistical odds of acting on their urges and committing an offense skyrocket.
So that specific shift, the transition from it's not my fault to it's not even a crime,
Yeah.
is the spark hitting the powder keg.
Yeah.
It's the exact moment the internal moral barrier shatters.
It is the absolute critical point of escalation.
Okay, but if you're listening right now, you might be thinking, all right, the psychology is fascinating, but how does an artificial intelligence system sitting on a server farm somewhere intervene in a cognitive distortion happening inside a human brain?
It sounds like science fiction.
It does. Are we really suggesting that we can let a pop-up ad try to cure a predator? Because that sounds incredibly naive.
It sounds naive until you look at the actual mechanics of secondary prevention in public health. Imagine an AI algorithm running passively in the background of an internet service provider, or maybe a search engine's infrastructure.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
It detects a user exhibiting the digital constellation we discussed earlier, the heavy VPN use, the crypto transactions, all of it. But then it also detects them running search queries for borderline content, or attempting to navigate to a known blacklisted URL associated with child sexual abuse material.
The system mathematically recognizes that they are standing at the absolute edge of the cliff.
Yes. And instantly, in real time, within milliseconds, the system can deploy an automated public health intervention directly onto their screen.
It disrupts their flow.
Exactly. It disrupts the user experience. It can trigger targeted social marketing campaigns. It can flash a stark warning message stating, this material is illegal, it is monitored, and accessing it carries severe criminal penalties.
Just a digital brick wall.
And simultaneously, it can provide immediate, anonymous, one-click links to psychological help hotlines, such as the Stop It Now campaign that was specifically highlighted in the research literature.
It's like a digital tap on the shoulder. It breaks the hypnotic flow of the internet and says, hey, we see exactly what you're looking for, your camouflage isn't working, and there is a way out before you cross the line.
And that disruption is exactly why it works. The goal of the AI in this public health context is to interrupt the cognitive distortion before it crystallizes into a permanent behavior.
Because if you just let them keep clicking, the distortion hardens.
Right. But if you disrupt the denial of abusiveness narrative, if the screen suddenly reminds them of the brutal legal consequences, the moral reality of the harm, and offers a confidential off-ramp via psychological help, you can actually pull them back from the brink. You break the cycle of rationalization by injecting friction into what was previously a completely frictionless environment.
That is an incredibly powerful concept. The idea that AI can offer a moment of friction exactly when a person is most vulnerable to their own worst impulses. It's basically technology acting as a conscience.
That's a great way to put it.
And this is the giant flashing neon caveat to everything we've talked about today.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
We are talking about engineering and artificial intelligence that monitors our internet behavior, analyzes our encryption use, weighs our metadata, tracks our crypto transactions, evaluates our search history, and builds psychological profiles of our mental state.
It is an unprecedented level of surveillance capability. There is no denying that.
It sounds like a dystopian nightmare. It sounds like the foundation of a totalitarian surveillance state. How on earth do we build a system powerful enough to catch the absolute worst, most camouflaged offenders in society without simultaneously destroying the privacy, the civil liberties, and the digital anonymity of every single innocent person on the internet?
That is the pivotal, defining challenge of this entire technology. And it brings us to the final and perhaps most crucial part of our deep dive: designing the shield. How do we build a framework for ethical monitoring?
Because we have to have rules.
Absolutely. And to address your fear of a dystopian state, the French livret actually opens its entire technical manual with a parable about humility. Before they even discuss code or algorithms or XGBoost, they cite the legend of Sissa.
And I am actually not familiar with the legend of
It
Sisson.
is a historical parable that is frequently taught in advanced data science and engineering courses. The story goes that Sissa invented the game of chess for a very powerful Indian king. The king was so mesmerized by the game that he offered Sissa any reward he desired in the entire kingdom. Sissa asked for something that sounded incredibly modest. He asked for 1 grain of wheat to be placed on the first square of the chessboard, 2 grains on the second square, 4 on the third, and so on, doubling the amount for all 64 squares.
Oh, right. This is the classic exponential growth mathematics problem.
Exactly. The king quickly agreed, laughing at how cheap the reward was. But as his advisors started calculating the math, they realized that by the time they reached the 64th square, the total amount of wheat required would be exponentially greater than the entire world's harvest for centuries.
Fulfilling the request would completely ruin the kingdom.
It would destroy it.
So what is the French government trying to say to their data scientists with this story? Why put it in an AI manual?
They are using the legend to enforce humility. It is a stark warning that technological demands that seem simple and righteous in their initial phrasing, like, hey, let's build an AI to monitor the network and catch predators, they can have dramatic, exponentially complex, and devastatingly unintended consequences.
If you don't bound it.
Right. If you engineer an AI without rigorous structural limits, it will inevitably consume all available data, invade all privacy, and inevitably flag innocent people. A system that is too complex and too powerful just becomes uncontrollable and dangerous.
So how do the French propose we actually put a leash on this technology? How do we build those limits into the code itself?
The livret lays out an exceptionally strict 7-step proof of concept, or POC, framework for safely building and deploying a predictive system. It is a comprehensive blueprint for ethical engineering.
Let's walk through these 7 steps. I really want to understand how this shield is forged. What's step 1?
Step 1 is define the clear objective. You cannot give an AI a vague mandate like, find bad guys on the internet.
Right, that's way too broad.
The objective must be hyper-specific and mathematically definable. For example, the objective might be identify high-risk cryptocurrency transactions that match the specific purchasing metadata patterns of known CSAM platforms.
CSAM being child sexual abuse material.
Yeah.
So you drastically narrow the AI's field of vision right from the start. It's only looking for one very specific thing. What is step 2?
Step 2 is objective performance measures. How do we know the AI is actually working and not just hallucinating patterns in the noise?
Which AIs do all the time.
They do. So this is where you establish the acceptable rate of false positives. If the AI flags 10 innocent people who just happen to use Tor and crypto for every 1 actual offender it finds, the system is a catastrophic failure. Falsely accusing someone of this specific crime completely ruins their life.
So the math has to be airtight.
The mathematical measure of success and the threshold for just pulling the plug and shutting the system down must be predefined before a single line of code is run on live data.
That makes total sense. You define the failure state early. Step 3.
Simulate decisions. Before the AI is ever connected to the real world or live networks, you must simulate what happens when a flag is actually raised.
Like a fire drill.
Exactly. If the heat map lights up in the real world, what is the exact operational protocol? Who receives the alert? How is the information verified by a human? You have to model the human reaction to the machine's prediction in a sandbox environment to ensure the response is proportional and legal.
You're wargaming the output. I like that. Step 4.
Optimal strategies. This step is about balancing technological capability with real-world resources. An AI running at full capacity might identify 1,000 suspicious IP addresses in a single day.
Which is too many.
Right. A regional cyber task force might only have 10 human detectives. The engineering strategy must optimize and filter the AI's output to match the reality of human resources, ensuring we don't just ground the authorities in an unactionable avalanche of data.
Okay, so you've built all the constraints.
Yep.
Step 5 is the algorithm itself, correct?
Yes. Step 5 is the algorithm. This is the point where the historical regularities, that massive 2026 dataset regarding VPNs, cryptocurrency evasion, dating app usage, and the markers of cognitive distortions, are actually fed into the XGBoost machine learning models to train the AI.
You finally turn the engine on.
But the algorithm is practically useless without the safeguards of Step 6,
Which is?
legal compliance and cybersecurity. The French Livret is adamant that any predictive system deployed in Europe must strictly adhere to the REIA, the European AI Act.
That's a big deal.
It is currently one of the most comprehensive and restrictive legal frameworks for artificial intelligence in the world. AI systems utilized by law enforcement are classified under the highest possible sensitivity levels, requiring massive audits. Furthermore, this step demands absolute data quality checks to prevent racial or socioeconomic bias from infecting the training data.
And what about the cybersecurity part?
It requires military-grade cybersecurity to protect the AI system itself.
Right, because if you build a machine that knows exactly how the police find predators, the predators are going to try to hack it.
Of course they are.
Imagine if an organized abuse ring hacked the AI to see which IP addresses the police were targeting, or manipulated the algorithms to intentionally hide their own digital footprints.
It would be a catastrophic compromise of intelligence. The shield needs its own shield. And finally, Step 7 is deployment and retrospective, referred to in French as retex.
Resex.
You deploy the system into the live environment, but you treat it as a continuous experiment. You constantly monitor its outputs, you learn from its inevitable mistakes, you update the historical training data, and you never ever assume the machine is infallible.
Now, within this 7-step framework, there are 2 specific governing rules from the French text that I found absolutely profound when we were researching for this deep dive. The first one is the principle of explicability.
Yes, explicability is non-negotiable. The AI cannot operate as a black box.
Let's explain what that means.
A black box is a deep learning algorithm where raw data goes in, an answer comes out, and the internal neural pathways are so incredibly complex that even the programmers who built the AI cannot explain exactly how it reached that specific conclusion.
It's like a magic 8-ball made of math. You shake it, and it tells you someone is guilty, but it literally can't show its work.
Exactly. And the European legal framework explicitly states that black box AI is unacceptable for any system affecting human rights or liberty. The AI must be able to explain why it flagged a user in clear, chronological terms that a human can understand.
So it can't just give a score.
Right. It cannot just output. User ID 1234 represents a 98% probability risk. It must output an audited log. User ID 1234 flagged due to the simultaneous initiation of an encrypted Telegram session, a specific metadata packet size transfer to a high-risk server node, and an outbound cryptocurrency wallet ping.
The human detective must be able to verify the machine's logic step by step.
Exactly, which perfectly sets up the second and perhaps most important rule. The system is strictly for decision support, the requirement of the human in the loop.
The human in the loop. The French Livret uses a brilliant medical analogy here, right?
They do. They point to OWKIN, which is a highly advanced medical AI system. OWKIN assists oncologists and doctors by predicting patient outcomes and analyzing incredibly complex genomic and medical data. But OWKIN does not make the final diagnosis.
It doesn't tell the patient they have cancer.
No. It does not write the prescription, and it certainly doesn't order the surgery. It simply assists the expert.
It provides the X-ray, but the doctor actually reads it.
Exactly. The exact same principle applies to predictive policing and public health interventions. A predictive system assists a detective or a public health worker. It provides the digital map. It highlights the statistical anomalies. But the AI does not make an arrest. It does not issue a subpoena.
A human has to do that.
The human being, who is bound by constitutional law, empathy, and ethical guidelines, must make the final, consequential decision.
I think it's crucial to pause here for just a moment of neutrality, because balancing the right to absolute digital privacy against the moral imperative of child protection is an intensely debated, highly charged sociopolitical issue all over the globe.
It is the defining digital debate of our era.
There are staunch civil libertarians who firmly believe that any government monitoring of internet traffic, even metadata, is an unconstitutional overreach that paves the way for tyranny. There are privacy advocates who argue that these algorithms will inevitably be misused or that the data will be weaponized against marginalized groups.
And those are valid fears.
They are. And then there are child safety advocates who argue that possessing the technological capability to stop the abuse of 300 million children and choosing not to deploy it out of theoretical privacy concerns is a catastrophic moral failure of our society.
And the French livret openly acknowledges this profound tension. These predictive models offer immense, almost miraculous technical promise. The mathematics are sound. The behavioral data extracted from the 2026 studies is statistically rigorous.
The tech works.
The technological capability to pierce the camouflage of these offenders exists right now. But society as a whole, through democratic debate and legal frameworks, must decide exactly where to draw the line between our fundamental right to digital privacy and our collective obligation to protect the most vulnerable among us.
The math can only tell us what is technically possible. The law and our shared ethics must tell us what is permissible.
That is perfectly stated.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We have covered massive, complex ground today.
We really have. We started with a theoretical blueprint, the French livret system predictifs. We examined the underlying architecture of predictive AI, the same complex mathematics used to map weather systems and optimize traffic, and we explored how to fuel it with a revolutionary new kind of data.
We fueled it with the 2026 behavioral data on the undetected online offender. We shattered the myth of the creepy stranger in the basement and revealed the chilling reality of the cloak of respectability, the educated, employed, married individuals hiding in plain sight.
We learned that while these offenders are perfectly camouflaged in their offline lives, they leave highly specific, measurable digital constellations online.
Right.
By programming an AI to look for the precise metadata combinations of heavy encryption, cryptocurrency evasion, dating app frequency, and extreme content consumption, we can build dynamic heat maps of the internet.
And we didn't just stop at the criminal justice response. We moved upstream into the realm of public health. We explored how AI can detect the digital footprints of cognitive distortions, that dangerous psychological shift from normalizing behavior to denying the abusiveness altogether.
That shift is key.
And we looked at how we can deploy automated, friction-inducing interventions and psychological help right at the exact millisecond a user is about to cross the line.
And finally, we discussed the ethical shield required to wield this power, the 7-step proof of concept, the absolute necessity of explicability to prevent black box algorithms, and the unyielding rule that AI must always remain a decision support tool for humans, never the final judge.
It's a testament to human ingenuity. But it also reminds us that the landscape of criminal diagnostics and human behavior will never be as clean or as binary as an X-ray of a broken arm. The human mind is infinitely more complex than a bone. But what this synthesis of advanced French AI engineering and cutting-edge psychological research shows us is that we are no longer entirely blind.
We have a new lens. For decades, the undetected offender relied on the vastness and the anonymity of the internet to hide. But the data has fundamentally changed the environment.
It has.
While the subject matter we tackle today is undeniably dark, the application of this technology is profoundly hopeful. The data has given us night vision goggles. We can finally see the patterns moving in the dark.
I love that metaphor, night vision goggles for the internet. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a lingering, provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on everything we've just discussed, but flips the perspective entirely.
What's the question?
If we now have the rigorous, peer-reviewed statistical proof that specific combinations of commercial tech platforms, the massive dating apps, the decentralized crypto exchanges, the fully encrypted messaging services, are the primary vehicles and tools utilized for this massive scale of abuse, at what point does the burden of running these predictive algorithms shift? At what point do we stop asking governments and taxpayer-funded law enforcement to build these ethical AI shields and start demanding that the multi-billion-dollar tech companies run these predictive models on their own platforms themselves?
That is a deeply fascinating question. If they built the digital streets, should they be the ones responsible for paying for the streetlights?
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly complex, vital deep dive. Keep asking those tough questions, keep looking for the hidden connections in the data, and we'll see you next time.